It is Port Royal, the richest city in the world, where there are neither rules nor laws. You can do whatever you want and buy whatever you desire. This city was so wealthy that it was guarded by pirates, but the most shocking fact is that these pirates were not alive. If you haven't heard of this city, let me tell you that until the 17th century, it was a part of our living human world. But one day, it suddenly vanished from the world map, and almost every person in the city turned into a ghost. This is a true story of the richest city in the world, which still exists in another realm with its dead pirates. So how did this city disappear from our world? Why is it called the City of Dead Pirates? And most importantly, where did it go after vanishing? Well, hello guys, I'm Kaushik, and let's start another new episode, The Golden City. Port Royal was a city situated on the shores of the Caribbean Sea in the 17th century. It was a trading port, but what set it apart from other cities was that it was guarded by pirates. However, as quickly as this city amassed wealth and infamy, it met its end just as swiftly. Within just 37 years, half of Port Royal's population was swallowed by death. What happened that buried this city in the pages of history? Was it the result of the greed and sins of its inhabitants? To unravel this mystery, we need to go back about 500 years in history. The story begins with a beautiful island, known today as Jamaica. In 1494, when Christopher Columbus set foot on a stunning Caribbean island during his second voyage, it was Jamaica. The native Taino people had called this place home for thousands of years. But Columbus had ulterior motives. He claimed the island for Spain under King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella. As you can imagine, this was a massive shock for the Taino people. At the time, Spain was one of the most powerful empires in the world, so no king dared to challenge their claim. As a result, the people of Jamaica had no choice but to accept the island and its surrounding smaller islands as part of the Spanish Empire. For the next 146 years, Jamaica remained under Spanish control. However, Spain never gave much importance to this island, as their focus was on Central and South America. When you're one of the largest empires, fighting with the British Empire to control two continents, it's understandable that a small island like Jamaica wouldn't get much attention. This is why the small part of Jamaica, where Port Royal was later established, was largely ignored by Spain. Little did they know how significant this island would become. In 1655, the British Empire sought to end Spain's dominance in the Caribbean Sea. Since most Caribbean islands were under Spanish control, King Oliver Cromwell sent a fleet of 17 warships to capture some of these islands from Spain. The British initially targeted Hispaniola, modern-day Haiti, and the Dominican Republic. However, after a perilous 2-month journey across the Atlantic, the British forces faced a large Spanish army. A spy within the British ranks had tipped off the Spanish about the surprise attack. A fierce battle ensued, causing significant losses to the British ships and soldiers. The British captains now had two options: retreat to England, admitting defeat, which meant certain death, as the British king was known to execute losing captains, or capture another significant territory to present to the king in hopes of mercy. After failing to conquer Hispaniola, the British targeted the smaller, less defended island of Jamaica. With minimal Spanish forces stationed there, the British quickly seized control, and Jamaica became part of the British Empire. When the British forces returned to England, the invasion leaders were imprisoned in the Tower of London. However, those who stayed behind in Jamaica soon realized the strategic value of their new colony. Jamaica had a unique sandbar that formed a large natural harbor, providing perfect shelter for ships. Port Royal was established at the very end of this sandbar, surrounded by deep water, which was crucial because large ships could easily dock and unload cargo. This made it the ideal spot for a trading hub. As a result, Port Royal quickly became the premier trading hub of the Caribbean. marking the beginning of the formation of the world's richest and most mysterious city. Recognizing its future potential, the British appointed a governor to collect taxes, ensure security, and enforce regulations. However, the British Empire, being vast, lacked enough soldiers to protect Jamaica and Port Royal. Governor Edward D'Oyly devised a unique solution. He entrusted the city's security not to an army, but to pirates. This decision, though strange, proved highly effective. The British governor gave these pirates a new identity: privateers. They were used against Spain, permitted to loot Spanish ships in the name of the British Empire. In return, a portion of the plundered treasure went to Port Royal and the British Crown. Thus, Port Royal became a stronghold for pirates and privateers. Interestingly, the character of Jack Sparrow in Pirates of the Caribbean was inspired by Captain Henry Morgan, a figure loved worldwide. From here, the story of Port Royal takes a turn. The city became so rich from pirate treasures that it was called the richest and wickedest city on Earth. Wicked because it was a place with no rules or laws. How could there be when the city's security was in the hands of the world's most notorious pirates? But what was the consequence of this wealth and crime? Let's move to the next part of the story, the crime city of the world. Port Royal, now thriving on plundered wealth, was also becoming a crime-ridden city. The blend of wealth and sin was evident in every street and corner. This was a time when pirates and privateers didn't just rule the seas, but dominated every alley in the city. Port Royal wasn't just a paradise for the rich. It was also counted among the most dangerous and infamous cities in the world. There was no law or order. The dire state of affairs can be gauged from the fact that every fourth building in Port Royal was either a tavern or a brothel. The city's biggest star, Captain Henry Morgan, wasn't just a pirate, but a brilliant strategist. His successful raids on Spanish ships and ports made him a legend in the pirate world. The wealth brought to Port Royal by Morgan and his crew turned the city into the Dubai of the 17th century. Gold, silver, jewels, and valuable goods looted from Spanish ships were unloaded daily in such vast quantities that Port Royal earned the title Pirates' Paradise. But as the saying goes, the pot of sin fills quickly, and something similar happened with Port Royal. Its sins and luxuries brought it to a point where its destruction seemed almost inevitable within just 37 years. No one could have imagined that Port Royal's fate would be so catastrophic that it would vanish from the world's maps along with its people. Let's move to the next part, the day of disaster. In just a few years, about 10,000 people had settled in Port Royal, living on just 51 acres of land. This might seem small compared to modern megacities, but in the 17th century, the world was very different. When the British captured Port Royal, New York's population was only 4,500. By the late 17th century, Port Royal had become the largest, richest, and fastest-growing English city. Outsiders believed the city's immense wealth would soon lead to its destruction in a major attack. And that's exactly what happened, but not in the way anyone expected. The force that destroyed Port Royal wasn't Jamaica's governor or William of Orange, England's king at the time. It was God himself. June 7th, 1692, is one of the darkest days in Port Royal's history. It was a normal morning, with everything seeming routine. But no one knew that this morning would change Port Royal's history forever. Amid the bustling crowds, a massive earthquake struck. It was so powerful that the sandy ground on which Port Royal was built liquefied, turning into a swamp-like state. In moments, half the city, its grand buildings and residents, began sinking into the earth. As if nature wanted to erase Port Royal completely, a devastating tsunami followed the earthquake, destroying what remained. In this catastrophic event, most of Port Royal sank into the sea, and about 50% of its population, around 5,000 people, perished. Some were swallowed by the sand, others by the tsunami. The remaining 5,000 survivors faced immense hardship, succumbing to deadly diseases and severe injuries. This wasn't just a natural disaster. Many believed it was God's punishment. But was it truly divine wrath, or just an unforeseen act of nature? Let's explore the truth and the aftermath. Why God is responsible for Port Royal's disaster. After the disaster, many saw it as a sign. Was it God's wrath? This question echoed everywhere. The Bible mentions cities like Sodom and Gomorrah, destroyed for their sins and corruption, and Port Royal's destruction was viewed similarly. But if it wasn't divine punishment, how did it happen? Building a city on Port Royal's land was a grave mistake. The city was constructed on a sand spit, which became saturated during the earthquake, causing liquefaction. The sand lost its solidity and the city sank into the sea. The tsunami made the destruction even deadlier. Within hours, Port Royal had almost vanished from the world's maps. Survivors tried to rebuild, but the city never regained its former glory. Fires and 4 major hurricanes further devastated it, as if nature was determined to erase Port Royal forever. Today, much of old Port Royal lies underwater, known as the city that sank. Its buildings, streets, and treasures remain preserved under the sea like a 17th century time capsule. It's considered the most important underwater archaeological site in the Western Hemisphere and is in the process of being declared a UNESCO World Heritage Site. However, due to Port Royal's criminal history and the atrocities committed against women and others, many hesitate to include it on the World Heritage List. Looking at the surviving above-water parts of Port Royal today, it's a stark contrast to its past. It's now a small village where fishermen and their families live peacefully. The pirate paradise has been replaced by simplicity. Yet, the sunken Port Royal remains a mystery, drawing historians and scientists. Port Royal's story teaches us that when humans cross the boundaries of greed and sin, nature settles the score in its own way. Whether you call it divine wrath or a natural disaster, Port Royal's destruction is a stark reminder that power and wealth cannot save us from ruin. What do you think? Was this terrifying event God's punishment, or just an unfortunate disaster and the misfortune of its wealthy residents?